Tupac Shakur. The final night on September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur was at the absolute peak of his career. He was only 25 years old. His music was dominating the charts. His movies were reaching millions of people. And everywhere he went, cameras followed. That night, Tupac wasn't expecting history to remember him. He was simply in Las Vegas for a championship boxing match. But before the night was over, a confrontation inside the MGM Grand would be followed by a shooting that shocked the world. And nearly 3 decades later, people are still asking the same question. ***, what really happened to Tupac Shakur? ***, to understand that night, we have to go back to the beginning. Tupac was born in New York in 1971 and grew up surrounded by political activism, art, poetry, and music. His mother, Afeni Shakur, had been involved with the Black Panther movement, and her influence helped shape the way Tupac viewed society. As a teenager, Tupac discovered that music and acting could give him something powerful, a way to express himself. He eventually moved to California and entered the growing hip-hop scene. His first major breakthrough came through Digital Underground, where he initially worked as a dancer before moving into recording. In 1991, he released his debut album, *2 Pacalypse Now*. His music wasn't simply about fame. He talked about poverty, racism, inequality, police brutality, relationships, ambition, anger, and survival. But the more successful Tupac became, the more complicated his life became. By the mid-1990s, he was one of the biggest and most controversial figures in hip-hop. Then came 1994. Tupac was dealing with serious legal problems when he went to Quad recording studios in Manhattan. That night, he was attacked and shot. He survived, but the incident changed him. Tupac became increasingly suspicious of the people around him, especially people connected to the East Coast hip-hop scene. The tension between Tupac and other major artists grew. What had once been competition between rappers began to feel much more personal. And Tupac eventually joined Death Row Records, placing himself directly inside one of the most powerful and controversial camps in hip-hop. Then came September 7, 1996. Las Vegas, 8:30 p.m. The MGM Grand was packed with more than 16,000 people for the heavyweight fight between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon. Tupac was there with Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight and members of his entourage. The atmosphere was completely different from what would happen later. Fans were celebrating. The fight ended quickly when Tyson defeated Seldon by technical knockout. But as Tupac and his group moved through the MGM Grand, something happened that would become one of the most important moments in the investigation into his death. A member of Tupac's entourage noticed Orlando Anderson. Anderson had previously been accused of being involved in the theft of a Death Row-associated chain. Tupac and several members of his group confronted him. A physical fight broke out. Security eventually separated everyone. The entire confrontation lasted less than a minute. No one could have known how important those few seconds would become. Tupac left the MGM Grand, and the group continued with their plans for the night. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then, around 10:45 p.m., Tupac and Suge Knight left the hotel in a black BMW. Las Vegas was still busy. Cars filled the streets. Lights covered the strip. And nobody around them knew that this would become Tupac's final journey. The convoy traveled along Flamingo Road. Then they stopped at an intersection. It was hot. The cars were waiting for the light to change. And then a white Cadillac approached. According to eyewitness accounts, the car pulled alongside Tupac's BMW. Suddenly, the situation changed. Shots were fired at the vehicle. The attack lasted only moments. But Tupac was critically wounded. Suge Knight was also injured. Knight managed to get the car moving and drove toward medical help. Eventually, police and paramedics arrived. Tupac was taken to the hospital. The world waited. Fans waited. His family waited. And then, 6 days later, the news came. Tupac Shakur had died. He was only 25. The murder immediately became one of the biggest mysteries in music history. Who ordered it? Who carried it out? And was the shooting connected to the fight at the MGM Grand earlier that night? For years, investigators and journalists examined different possibilities. One theory focused on gang retaliation. According to this theory, the confrontation with Orlando Anderson created a motive for retaliation. Anderson denied being responsible for Tupac's murder during his lifetime, and he was never charged with the killing. Another theory pointed toward people within Tupac's own circle. Questions were raised about security arrangements that night, and whether someone close to Tupac could have known his movements. But these theories were never proven in court. There were also claims involving figures from the East Coast hip-hop scene. Some accusations connected Tupac's murder to the growing rivalry between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records. But again, allegations are not the same as proof. The case remained unsolved for decades. Then the story changed. Years later, attention increasingly focused on Dwayne "Kef" D. Davis, a man who had publicly discussed his connection to the night of Tupac's death. Investigators revisited statements surrounding the shooting. And in 2023, 27 years after Tupac's death, Davis was arrested and charged in connection with the murder. He has denied being the shooter and pleaded not guilty. For the first time in decades, the case had a suspect facing criminal charges. But even that did not answer every question. The identity of the person who actually fired the shots, the full chain of events that led to the attack, and the motives behind it have remained subjects of intense debate. And that's what makes Tupac's story so fascinating. His death became bigger than the murder itself. Because Tupac wasn't simply a rapper. He was an actor, a poet, a controversial public figure, and for millions of people, a voice that represented anger, ambition, struggle, and survival. He lived only 25 years, but he created a body of work that continued to influence generations after his death. His final night began with a boxing match. It continued with a confrontation. Then came a drive through Las Vegas. And finally, one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in music history. Decades later, people are still searching for answers. But perhaps the most important part of Tupac's story isn't only how he died. It's what he left behind. A career that was still evolving. Music that continues to reach new audiences. And a legacy that has survived far beyond the night of September 7, 1996. Tupac once spoke about overcoming obstacles. And in the end, that may be the simplest way to understand his story. His life was complicated. His career was controversial. His final night remained surrounded by unanswered questions. But his voice never disappeared. Tupac Shakur died at 25. But his story never stopped.